In 1917, the Danes sold one of their last colonies in the Caribbean to the United States for $25 million. Today we know these islands as the US Virgin Islands. But what exactly led to this sale? Why did Denmark give up a colony that it had owned for almost 250 years? The Danish West Indies, which consisted of the islands of St. Thomas, St. John and St. Croix, had been a Danish colony since the 17th century. It all began in 1671, when the Danish West India Company acquired the island of St. Thomas. The colonization was part of the European expansion into the Caribbean, where sugar cane plantations brought immense wealth. Sugar was as valuable in the 17th and 18th centuries as oil is in the modern world, and the Danes wanted a piece of this lucrative trade. They colonized the islands and used slave labor to grow sugar and export it to the European market. In 1718, St. John was colonized by the Danes, and St. Croix was bought from the French in 1733 to further expand sugar production. This plantation economy made Denmark a major player in the transatlantic slave trade. But as with many colonial powers, the tide turned over time. The Danish plantation owners were affected by an uncertain economic situation. In the middle of the 19th century, the price of sugar fell worldwide, and sugar production in the Danish West Indies became increasingly unprofitable. This was the first sign that the colony was losing its economic luster. At the same time, social tensions on the islands grew. A turning point came in 1848, when a slave revolt broke out on the islands. The Danish colonial government was forced to abolish slavery. Although the islands officially continued to exist as a colony after the abolition of slavery, their economic basis had changed fundamentally. The former slaves now worked as free farmers, but sugar production never returned to its former level. The colony began to stagnate. Meanwhile, Denmark itself experienced a period of upheaval in the 19th century. In Europe, Denmark lost the war against Prussia in 1864 and had to cede large parts of its territory in Schleswig and Holstein. This loss weakened the country and meant that Denmark increasingly focused on maintaining its core territories and had less interest in its overseas colonies. And then a new world power entered the scene: the United States. Since the end of the 19th century, the USA had been interested in expanding its influence in the Caribbean. After the Spanish-American War in 1898, in which the USA conquered Puerto Rico, interest in the Danish islands grew. The strategic location of the islands made them an ideal base for the USA, especially in view of the recently opened Panama Canal. The USA had already made an initial attempt to buy the islands in 1867, but the treaty failed due to opposition in the US Senate. However, at the beginning of the 20th century, when the First World War broke out, the situation became more urgent. The United States was determined to prevent the islands from falling into enemy hands, particularly those of the German Empire. In 1916, negotiations between the US and Denmark began again, and this time both sides were ready to finalize the deal. The colony had become an ever-increasing financial burden for Denmark, and there was little prospect of revitalizing it economically. The costs of administering and maintaining the islands now exceeded the income they generated. For the USA, on the other hand, there was a strategic opportunity to expand its influence in the Caribbean and strengthen its security. The price of $25 million was reasonable for both sides, and the islands officially changed hands on March 31, 1917. The Danes finally withdrew from colonial politics, and the US Virgin Islands became part of the United States. Today they are a US territory and play an important role in tourism, but the history of their colonial past is still present. That's it for today. If you want to know more about the largest land purchase in history, I can recommend my video about the Louisiana Purchase. Have fun watching and see you next time. Ciao!